Today, our message is Spirit of God versus Sin out of Hebrews 3, 7-14. So if we can all stand, all of us in the room, so that we can read the word of the Lord out loud together. It's just 2 slides. So we're going to read that, everyone's loud voice, all together, declaring the truth and the power of the word of God together. Okay? Ready? Begin. That is why the Holy Spirit says, today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled, when they tested me in the wilderness. There your ancestors tested and tried my patience, even though they saw my miracles for 40 years. So I was angry with them, and I said, their hearts always turn away from me. They refuse to do what I tell them. So in my anger, I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest. Be careful then, dear brothers and sisters. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. For if we are faithful to the end, trusting God just as firmly as when we first believed, we will share in all that belongs to Christ. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. All right. So here we are. Can I have the back also? The camera switched on. Awesome. Okay. All right. So this month we're digging into Hebrews 12, 1-2, and talking about the idea of perseverance. In our faith, how do we persevere? In our walk with God, how do we persevere? And so I use this fire analogy, so you guys can see the Spirit of God versus sin, the fire analogy last week. And how many of you guys remember the idea, what do you need to make a fire happen? Okay, what was that called? The paper tinder, good job. Who remember because of the app? Okay, we remember, good. So the paper, the cardboard, the leaves, the things that catch fire quickly, but those things also burn out quickly. And so what else do you need after the tinder? You need kindling. Wow, you guys are so smart. Is the answer somewhere? No, okay, great. Kindling. Those are like twigs, branches. They're not as hard to catch on fire as a log, but they will go a little longer than tinder. Then what's after that? Like logs, right? Like actual firewood that will catch on fire and burn for longer, right? Okay, so the idea being that when the Lord comes and ignites our hearts on fire, it is only him that can be the match. Only him can be the fire source, right? Only he can light our hearts on fire. I cannot make myself light on fire, okay? I cannot make myself super hyped up in the Lord. Only God can truly ignite the passion inside that comes from his Spirit, okay? But if I don't steward my flame, if I don't do that well, that fire that God lit can die very easily, okay? And so that analogy helps us to realize that what you're surrounded by, what's fueling your fire, will either fuel your fire or it will extinguish your fire. Right? So what you're surrounded by, who you're surrounded by, what your world is like right now, what you're looking at all the time, what you're hearing, who you're around, it will either ignite your fire more or it will extinguish your fire, one or the other. So only you have that choice as to what kind of environment you're going to create so that the fire of God can keep burning well. That was last week. Now, this week is another idea, playing along this idea, okay? Tisang had his dream come true this last week. He visited a fire station. It was the best thing in the world. Unfortunately, Dad gave away the surprise before I could go take him. However, he was very, very happy about it, okay? He had 1.5 million questions and guaranteed he's not here. That's why it's quiet. But otherwise he'd be telling you all about it, okay? But one thing I learned, do you guys know what 3 things do you need to make a fire keep going or a fire die out? What are the 3 things? Not what I just said about the tinder, not that. What are the 3 elements that make a fire run? Okay, what? I heard oxygen, air. What else? Oxygen alone is not going to cause a fire, okay? Otherwise, it'd be fire everywhere. Oxygen, air, what else? You guys got to speak up. What? Heat? Okay, so a heat source that will turn into a flame. And what's the third? The third is what we just talked about the whole time. Fuel. You need something to fuel the fire, okay? Now, oxygen, heat, fuel. This is called the fire triangle. Did you guys learn this in school? I did not. Okay, great. I felt a little dumb that I did not remember any of this from school when I went to the fire station. But what they say is, so this is the fire triangle, right? If one of these pieces is missing, the fire does not go. The fire no longer keeps burning, okay? So if you remove the fuel source, the fire it will burn out eventually. If you remove air, which you can't in this world really too much, it will stop the fire. If you remove the flame initially, right, if there's no matches or whatever, it's not gonna light the fire. So one of those three things, so when firefighters go out to fight fires, they are trying to eliminate one of those things. If you eliminate one of those things, the fire will die out, okay? And so this fire triangle, I just love this fire analogy right now. I'm gonna run with it for the next 3 weeks, okay? But I love this concept because idea being that if you look at this fire triangle, okay, remember the fuel is up to us, right? You have to have the right tinder, kindling, and logs. You have to have the right environment. You have to steward your life in a way that you can keep hearing God's voice and keep being surrounded by God's influence, right? So that's up to us. That heat source is from God. Only God can light you on fire, right? His Spirit. What's the oxygen? Because if there's no oxygen in a vacuum, a fire cannot start, okay? Another way of thinking about oxygen or breath or air, if you think about it biblically, is the Spirit of God. So God's Spirit moving and breathing through us is what keeps the fire going, okay? So in other words, that oxygen piece is one that both of us play. I play a part and God plays a part. Because only God can be the Spirit of God, right? But I can position my life in a way where I either encourage the Spirit of God moving in my life or I quench the Spirit of God moving in my life, okay? I can either encourage the Spirit of God in my life or I can kind of suck it dry out of my life. It's not that you're more powerful than the Spirit of God. It's that God is always working in partnership with us. Even in creation, he created Adam and Eve to partner with him in ruling over this world. God is always about partnership. He is sovereign. He is all-powerful, almighty. And yet he treats us with such dignity and kindness because he values us for who we are. And so God will never, ever force his way into your life. He will always, always be invited. And so the Spirit of God is either invited or it's quenched. Only those two options, okay? So in your life right now, think about, are you allowing the Spirit of God to move, or are there things that are quenching the Spirit of God from moving? You could be the holiest Christian in the world, and still there are things that can quench the Spirit of God. Okay? So this is not a judgment thing. This is how can I create the best fire triangle in my life? Okay? That's what we're trying to do. How can we create the best fire triangle? When you're burning out, or you are burning too hot, or whatever you're burning, how can we create the very best fire triangle in your heart spiritually? Okay? So go to Hebrews 12. This is our main idea from last week. And I underlined these 4 main ideas. Last week was the cloud of witnesses. This week we're going over, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Then let us run, okay? Now imagine we're wrapping up the Olympics today, I think, right? Or is it already done? Because it's Paris. They're ahead of us. Anyway, they're wrapping up the Olympics. And you guys saw, I'm sure you saw, on whatever, either gymnastics or track or swim. Who are the big names in all the sports right now? Simone Biles. Homegirl's 27 and still doing amazing, okay? 27. I literally, guys, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say, I was praying this message and I was like, oh yeah, Simone Biles. Yo, I went on this black hole on YouTube. There's so many videos of her doing amazing things. She's amazing. Simone Biles. Who else? And swim. What's a big name? Come on, you guys should know. No one knows. What's her name? Katie? Ledecky. She's a big deal. Did you guys know Michael Phelps has 28 medals? I did not know he's the most a great Olympian. He's old now though. He's not swimming no more, but like he's like really, really good. Track and field. There's like so many stars, Olympians, like amazing people. Now, imagine all of those people, all these athletes. Imagine Simone Biles on the floor with like 20-pound weights strapped to her arms and legs. Okay? I mean, I don't doubt that homegirl did stuff like that to train, right? But in actual like Olympic medal performance, would you do that? No. Like that's not gonna guarantee her very best performance. When you and I are running the race for Jesus, remember, this is not a 100-meter dash. This is a marathon. Did you guys know there's marathon runners in the Olympics too? I did not know that. I feel like track and field gets all the glory, but there's marathon runners too. There are people in Paris who ran marathons for the Olympics for fun. I don't know. Anyway, the point being, this race for Christ, living for Jesus as a Christian, it's not a 100-meter dash. It is a marathon for the rest of your life. Okay? And so when you're running a marathon, you do not run with weights intentionally on you when it's race time. You have to strip away everything in your life. So if you're a half marathon, I have a friend of mine, one of my aunties, she's in her 40s, and maybe in her late 30s, she got really into marathon running after she had her kids. And so she ran her marathon in Chicago, she ran it in California, she's just like amazing. And so she talks often about when you're running, there's so many things to prepare, especially leading up to the race, okay? You gotta know your body. And so how you feel your body the few days leading up to it, what you eat, how you drink, how you sleep, like you ain't gonna eat like cup ramen the night before you go marathon running, okay? You just can't do stuff like that, all right? Like, does that make sense? Like you have to prepare your life and your body in a way that you can run the race well. Same thing spiritually. If we want to run this race for Jesus and we're serious about it, then we have to prepare our lives, prep our lives in a way that aligns for us to run well. And one of the things we have to do is look at the sin in our lives. Because think about yourself running with chains and a net around your neck and like a brown bag over your head, okay? That's what sin looks like. Like a grocery bag over your head, a net around you, like chains tied to your arms and your legs. That's what it's like when we all have sin in our lives. I'm not talking about like obvious sins, like homeboys going over there like murdering people. I'm talking about like the little itty ones that often entangle us. When you go fishing, some of you love fishing, right? I know nothing about fishing, so I'm gonna try not to botch. I'm looking at David because he loves fishing. I'm gonna try not to botch this analogy, okay? But think about a giant fish that you're trying to catch. What is it that catches that fish? On your fishing rod, what is the crucial piece? What is it? The hook and the bait. How big is it? It's very small. You don't catch this size fish with this size bait. That would be weird, right? Like it's tiny, right? The hook is tiny and the bait is tiny, but that's what catches the big fish, okay? Same thing with sin. It is often the small things that we think are not a big deal that entangle and ensnare us. And if you're serious about running for God, you got to look at that area of your life. What is the bait? What is the bait of Satan moving in my life? The things that cause me to fall, the things that cause me to trip up. What are the small sins that I've allowed in my life that now I'm like dragging my feet and I'm like, why am I so stuck? It's those little things. And so, what hinders you spiritually? Think about it. What hinders you spiritually? What is your bait? What is the hook that takes you off track with God? Okay? Think about it. Here we go. Hebrews 3:7. When the Holy Spirit says, the Holy Spirit says, today when you hear God's voice, don't harden your heart as Israel did when they rebelled. So let me give you some context, okay? As you guys know, what are the two most, you guys better know this, okay? I'm making eye contact. Okay? What are the two most important events in the early Old Testament? Two biggest moments. What's the first one? Okay, what about Genesis? What event was the biggest? So creation, okay? What's the next biggest one? It's in the next book. Okay, what about Exodus? When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. Okay, those are two really, really critical pinpoints in the Old Testament. Why? Because everything is foreshadowed and like mirrored off of those two things. Did you guys know? It starts with the garden. It's going to end with a new everything, new creation. Original creation, new creation. Exodus, salvation, freedom from slavery. Jesus came to set us free from slavery. When they walked through the Red Sea, that was a picture of baptism, you guys. There's so many things about that, so many things that foreshadow our salvation. Two most critical things. Okay, so here we are in Exodus. The Israelites, after 400 plus years of being enslaved, thousands of them, God sets them free by miracles, okay? You guys know the 10 plagues. Every one of them targeted one of Egypt's gods, okay? And here's Pharaoh crumbling, okay? Like the greatest nation, the greatest empire of that time crumbled. God is like, yo, who's God? It's me, okay? Like there's no question. And so he leads them, he frees them, and they're in the wilderness, and God said, I will give you this land. It's a promised land. That promised land was literal for them, but it's figurative for us. What is the promised land for us? Eternity with him forever. Do you see all the parallels, okay? And so here they are, and God said, I will give you this land. They send 12 spies. They come back, okay? And what did 10 of them say? We can't do it. Dude, they're too big. Giants are too big. Everything is fruitful, it's beautiful, it's amazing. It's just like God said, but we cannot do it. And those 10 spies, that word of doubt spread throughout the entire camp. And that entire generation spent 40 years wandering in the front door of the promised land. Do you know what I'm saying? They're literally at the front door, and they spent 40 years wandering. Because God is like, look, God is boss, yo. He's like, if you're not gonna learn this, you better learn this lesson. And again, they kept not listening to him. They saw the Red Sea part. They saw the 10 plagues. They saw manna and quail fall from the sky to feed them every day, a cloud by day, a fire by night. They saw everything, and yet they did not trust that he would bring them to the promised land. And so for 40 years they wandered, and that generation all died away. That was the greatest rebellion of that time. The greatest act of rebellion. Now, why does the author of Hebrew use that to describe sin? He's using this to describe the idea of sin. He's saying, don't be like them. What was the root of this sin? Because you and I are not wandering in a desert, right? Like you and I are not doing the exact same thing. But what is it about this that we're supposed to pull away? What was the root of their sin? Even after seeing miracles, because you and I, we have not seen those kind of miracles, right? Like I've seen some, okay? And I've lived through some, and I am like, love Jesus, like love how God has moved in my life with that. But I haven't seen manna fall from the sky. I haven't seen the Red Sea part. I haven't seen those are crazy miracles. They saw those miracles. And yet, at the very end, when push came to shove, they could not trust God. So what was the root of that sin? Next slide, last slide. Oh, sorry, no, last slide, next slide. It's underlined right here. He's saying, look, that's the greatest example. So now to you all, the author is saying, be careful, be careful. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving. Make sure your heart is not unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. If you look and open up to Hebrews 3, you'll see at the very last, a few verses down, it also says, do not let unbelief be the sin that takes you away from God. That's my paraphrase version. It's on there, okay? A few verses down. He's saying, do not let your hearts turn away because of unbelief. Y'all, unbelief is the scariest sin. It is the root of all sin. Why did Adam and Eve sin in the garden? Because of what? Unbelief. They didn't believe that what God said was true. They believed what the enemy said instead. The root of sin is unbelief. This next quote, I love it. It's by a theologian, and he says this: unbelief is not inability to understand. Okay? Now, there are some of us that if we don't know much about God, we just don't understand. And that's okay. We just got to grow in our understanding. But when we say things like, oh, I don't believe in God because like X, Y, Z, oftentimes unbelief is not your inability to understand, but it's unwillingness to trust. That's the distinction. Unbelief is not knowing. If you don't know, that's okay. We all can learn. Does that make sense? We all can learn more about God. So you might not be deep in your faith, and that might be because you just don't know very much, and that's okay. That's why we do things like Bible study, okay? But the point being, like, unbelief, truly at its root, though, is an unwillingness to trust. It is the will, not the intelligence, not what you know, that is involved. Okay, so unbelief at its root is an unwillingness to trust. There might be different reasons why, but we're not willing to fully trust God. It's the idea of like, I cannot believe versus I will not believe. I cannot believe versus I will not believe. It's unbelief is I will not believe. Now, most of you, if I ask you, are you not willing to believe? No one's going to be like, yeah, that's me. I will not believe God. No one in this room is going to say that, okay? But what I'm asking is to look deep in our hearts, because most of us have a streak of this somewhere in our lives. Somewhere in our lives where we're like, God, everything's okay, but don't touch this one thing. You know, we all have that thing. We all have that thing. And on one hand, that makes us human. So there's not judgment there. But that one thing might be the very thing that is stopping you from fully trusting him. And when we don't fully trust him, we give maybe 1 centimeter of unbelief to work in our life. How many of you guys know every spring, winter is long here, right? But do you know why? The one thing I don't love about spring and summer, bugs, okay? Guys, do you guys know I really dislike spiders? I have this fear of them because one time, never mind, I'll show you later. But the point being, like, I really hate spiders. But do you know who finds them in our house all the time? Me. Literally, like, 4 other people live in the house, 3 people live in the house, right? It's 4 of us. Every one of them walking by the same area, no one sees it but me. But my kids see the tiny cute ones. I see the giant freaky ones. They're like colored and you're like, oh, this is poisonous, guaranteed, okay? Like, this is what I'm thinking. And so even my kids, even my 2-year-old now knows if mommy's screaming, it's because there's a spider, okay? And so, but what I just think about is, man, somewhere in this house is one spider mama that gave birth to all these spiders, and like, they just come out everywhere all the time when it's the right time. But if I can just find that mom and kill it and like, kill all the babies, we're all good, you know? That sounds really graphic. The point being, it's one little thing. It's one little thing. It's one ant colony. It's one mama spider. It's one yeast, one seed, one weed. You know, dandelions. I did not know until I moved to Kansas City, because I grew up in Arizona, so like nothing grows there, literally. I'd never seen a dandelion in my life, literally, until I was 25. Moved to Kansas City, we're there. It's humid, it's like Korea. And so it's spring, and like the grass, there's all these little yellow flowers. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so pretty. He's like, those are weeds. I was like, no, they're so pretty. And I'm like, look at it, it's like the fields are alive, you know, like it's beautiful. And then give it a few weeks and they're all dandelions. And I'm like, oh, that's cute. And he's like, that's literally spreading the weeds everywhere. And I'm like, oh, now when I have to pick them all out, I don't like them, you know? But the point being, that one weed releases all the little dandelions. everywhere now. Does it make sense? That's what sin is like in our lives. That little streak of unbelief that we all have, if we let it go unchecked, it goes crazy. I look at my backyard and I literally see spiritual warfare at work every day because we have to work so hard to get the grass to grow. But the weeds, man, no problem. No, not hard at all. If you guys come over, it's a problem. It's a problem. Same thing spiritually. It's so hard to grow, but it's so easy to let the things that drive us away from God grow. And so, what do? Most of the time, it's very hard for you to see your own weeds, okay? Like actually in my backyard, low-key, we have this, our neighbor, they moved out of the country and they have renters in the house. And from my window in the backyard, I can see both my backyard and theirs. And talk about, man, human beings, I'm just like, yo, their yard is so insane. They need to like take care of their weeds. Meanwhile, like we got like a weed jungle on the very bottom of our backyard. But it's crazy how you can't see your own, but you can see someone else's real well. You know what I'm talking about? It's kind of crazy. The point being, look at this verse. If you go back to the previous verse, go back one slide. It says, you must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. What it's saying is, if it's hard for you to see your own sin, because let me tell you, it's very hard. You need to find people that you trust in your life that can give you true feedback, that you know they love you and they're telling you this because they want you to grow in God. Does that make sense? You need those kind of people in your life. You need a church community where you guys can be like, hey, yo, I love you, and that's probably not going to help you. We need that kind of culture, and we're not quite there yet. And that's one area we have to grow in. Is how do I grow in God myself, and how do I help my brothers and sisters to grow in God more? That when so-and-so that I trust as a leader says to me, hey, you probably should check this out. You probably should look at this area of your life. It's not because they hate you. It's not because you're the worst. It's because they love you. And they're like, yo, your weed jungle going cray-cray. So let's get it under control, okay? Like if you don't grow, I don't grow. Let's grow together. While it is still today, encourage each other, exhort each other. Help each other be like, hey, that's not the right way to go. Let's go together. For if we are faithful to the end, does it matter how you start the race? It does, but it matters most how you end the race. How you end the race. If you fall, you got to get back up. It doesn't matter. It does matter how you start, but it actually matters most how you end. And so it's saying here, if you trust in God just as firmly as when you started living for him, when you first believed, then we can all share in that eternal glory with him forever. Yo, when I go to heaven, I better see you all there. I better see you all like loving Jesus like crazy, okay? But it starts today. Notice how it doesn't say it starts yesterday or tomorrow. It starts today. It starts today you growing in your faith. It starts you today stewarding your fire triangle, okay? You gotta be like, okay, what am I doing? Because that sin, that jungle is going to quench that oxygen out of your fire triangle. Y'all, sin, the root of sin is unbelief. And that is what quenches the spirit. It takes the oxygen out of the room of your life. And even if God is like trying to light you on fire and all the fuel is there and everyone at church is coming together and fueling you up. But if you are not dealing with that sin in your own life, it will not light. This is not a one-time thing. This is not a one-time like, okay, I gotta come to Jesus and confess all my sins right now. Do it, that's great too. But this is like an everyday thing. Let me ask you a question. If you didn't shower every day, how long could you do that for without feeling gross? Okay? Answer that question. How many days could you go without showering and that be okay? Okay? I mean, I hope it's not more than a week or two. Like that's, I mean, missions. Sometimes you have to do like, a week and a half, okay? But the point being, if you don't just shower once, you gotta keep showering. Some of you shower so much. I worry for your water bill. But the point being, like, shower like that in your spiritual walk every day. Every day. So let me ask you, in your life right now, how is the flame? Maybe it's like kind of burning low. That's okay. It cannot burn bright all the time. There are times when it burns brighter, times when it burns smaller, times when it's burning out, times when we fuel it again. That's all a part of the journey. But the important thing is stewarding your flame. So today, I don't want you guys to actually talk to each other. I want you guys to actually reflect for yourselves. Because, of course, the sin question is one that I don't want you guys to be like, hey, here's my sin, y'all. Here's how I sin all the time, okay? No, we don't have to do that. But what I want you to do right now is take out your phones. And if you can have the questions in the front and the back, take out your phones or your notebooks or your journals. I encourage you guys to bring your journals so you can write, okay? But I want you guys to answer these 3 questions for yourself. For you personally, what do you think most hinders and entangles you? What most hinders and entangles you? You're not going to share this with anybody, okay? No one's going to read it. No one's going to ask you. But I do want you to be honest and take this moment to assess for yourself. And answer that first question. Answer the rest of the questions. Where are you in your faith journey? Maybe you have to grow more, and that's okay. Or are you in a place where you have to learn to surrender? Who is your accountability? How will you humbly ask for and receive? Okay, so everyone pull out your phones. I want everyone typing away, nothing else. Just write down your thoughts here, okay? I lay before you all of my sins, all the things that I'm unwilling to budge on, all the things that I'm stubborn about, all the things that I'm unwilling to trust you. One of my favorite verses is the verse where it says, I'm going to butcher the story now, but it's in the Gospels, and Jesus is about to heal a man's child, and he asks the man, do you believe that I can heal? And he says, I believe. Lord, help my unbelief. And it's one of my favorite verses because I think it captures the reality of our Christian walk so much. That often we do believe, but often we wrestle with unbelief. And so right now, let's spend a few minutes just coming before God in prayer and saying, God, would you come? I think I've quenched the Spirit of God for a while in my life. Or maybe it was just discouragement or disappointment or tiredness, whatever it may be. Come before God and say, God, would you come? Renew the fire